So today I'm going to show you how to make some really cool animations using X particles inside of Cinema 4D, and I'll also be rendering out of Redshift. So here are some samples showing the end result, and I actually have a 3-hour animation on my YouTube as well where you can see the full version. But I'm just going to go over the basics of how I did this, and I hope this helps you in your projects. I worked within Cinema 4D first, and then after that I took the animation into After Effects, and then I did final editing in Premiere. For this tutorial, I'm just going to show the process within Cinema 4D, and I'm going to focus mostly on X particles and creating X particles from a texture, and I used a noise in order to do it. So that's what this tutorial is going to focus on. It's not going to focus on any editing, just doing the raw animation inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift. The first thing I will do is I will grab a sphere here, and I'll create a PBR material. I'm going to name this sphere XP Particle Emitter. And then I'll go under Insidium and drop in an XP system. We already have an XP emitter within the emitters. And for the XP emitter, under Object, I'm going to choose Object instead of a rectangle. If I hide this sphere right now, you'll see we have a rectangle and it's emitting particles, and that's just the default. We're going to change this to Object, and we're going to make the object this sphere. And once I make that change, even though the sphere is hidden, you'll see that it is emitting particles. And as I increase the segments on the sphere, it'll change the appearance of the particles. The fewer segments, the particles start to come out in these very clear lines, and maybe that's something you're going for, but it's not what I'm going for in this tutorial, so I'm going to really up these segments so that we have a nice randomness kind of look to our particles. So that is the first thing I'd like to do. And for this emitter, I don't just want it to come out of this XP emitter object from the polygon center. So instead of choosing emit from polygon center, I'm going to choose texture. And once we add in texture, we'll have this texture tab available. Before I add that to the texture tag, I need to actually turn off reflectance, turn on color, and add in a texture. So I'll select noise for right now, and I'll actually turn back on the sphere so that we can see it. And under here, you can select whatever kind of noise you'd like. I feel like going with electric. I think electric looks nice. And now that I pause it, the texture appears. It didn't like calculating the particles and also showing the texture at the same time. So if you run into that issue and you can't see your noise, just hit pause down here and you'll be able to see your texture in here, whatever kind of noise you choose. I'm going with electric. You can choose whatever you'd like, and I'm going to change the colors. And here, when I change the colors, I will actually be changing the color of the particles as soon as we add in that emitter. So the colors here are controlling the colors in there. I might make them green and purple. I'm thinking about it. Maybe, maybe not. I like that they're very different from each other. And hopefully they'll stand out nicely. Could even go with blue and purple. Purplish blue. Make it a little darker so we have greater contrast. I'd like to increase the contrast of this texture and scale it way down. We'll try 48% and see how that looks. I'll try adjusting the brightness. And it might take a second to update in your viewport, but it will. And now that we have our texture built, right click on emitter, texture, and drag this texture into here. And now we're emitting the colors from the texture, which is really cool. What I'd also like to do is change how much is emitting at a time. I'll click on emitter and make sure I'm on the emission tab and select and have emission selected. And here I can adjust the speed at which these are emitted. I'll choose 10. Now it's really slowed down quite a large amount. And I can also adjust the birth rate of these particles, which means how many are being produced. So I can up this quite a bit, and I can add another 0 onto there, so that's 10,000. And now you'll see that we have much more emitting from this sphere's texture. I'm going to hide the sphere. I'll go under Redshift, choose Redshift Object, and I'll put this on the particle emitter. And you'll notice that if it is on the sphere, it won't have particles as an option. If I move it over to the particle emitter, there will be this tab here called particle. So we need to put the object tag on the emitter itself. And we can choose to have point instances or sphere instances. You can choose a lot of different options. And in order to have these particles show up, I need to choose Create Redshift Materials Particle and create a Redshift Particle Material. And I'll drag this to our emitter. And now we have this here, and we aren't going to see too much yet because we really don't have any lights in our scene. But instead of adding a light to our scene, what I want to do is make the particles light up, because I think that'll be fun. And you'll see right here we have this color user data node. And this color user data node is actually going to use the colors that we have showing in our viewport right here that are coming out of this PBR texture that I created. So I'm going to also want to drag that color data into the overall emission color. And if we hit play, we'll see a little bit there, but I want it to be more than that. I'd like to increase this emission weight and make these glow. And now there they are. And these particles look pretty big right now. Maybe that's what you're going for. I mean, we're just experimenting here, having fun with X particles, so you do you. If you want to do something else with your particles, go for it. I feel like I may want to change how these particles look, though. And by decreasing this radius, I just made these particles look a whole lot tinier. You can make them look bigger or smaller. You can do whatever you want. You can decide, I want these particles to be huge, and I'm going to keyframe it, and then I'm going to make them small part way. And maybe you think that's what you like and that's what looks cool. But right now these large particles are kind of covering up the small particles, so I don't think I'm going to do that. I might change my mind later, but for right now I'm leaving this at 0.2. And this can be changed. Maybe 0.1. I'm very indecisive, as you can see. I think I want these to glow a little bit more. So I'm going to go back into our particle, texture, material, and I'm going to up this emission weight further, up to 2. And that glows a little bit more than what it did before, which I think is looking pretty cool. Trying to find a nice balance between blue and green in the texture, because I feel like the blue isn't showing up too much. It might be too dark of a blue. Maybe I want to make it purple. And by the way, you can keyframe these colors, so if you want it to be a different color at a different time, you can do that. You can do whatever you want. I think this is one of those plugins that's just fun to mess around with and see what happens. If we go under modifiers, we can try out different types of modifiers. And now it looks like this is turning because we added a vortex modifier. And that honestly looks pretty darn cool. I cannot lie about that. That looks really cool. Looks like a spinning planet. Can also add some turbulence in here. I'll make it wavy turbulence. Maybe this vertex. So I just added a wind modifier. I'm going to pause this. And it is blowing it in that direction, which is not all too helpful to me right now anyways, I don't think. I'm going to turn this around. And now it's being blown in that direction and also being spun around, which is kind of cool. I'll add in some more frames so that we can see this as it animates for a longer amount of time. I've decided to turn off the vortex as well as the wind to just see what it looks like with turbulence. And I think this looks pretty great. They've clumped together and spread apart, creating this really interesting pattern. I'll turn back on the wind and watch these get blown away. Under Insidium, Generators, XP Trail. We can add that in. And that will actually cause there to be a trail from these, but right now we're not seeing them. So what I did is I added this Redshift object tag here and I changed the curve to cylinders. And it kind of looks like this crazy green here. Spaghetti thing that's happening. I think that's a little bit too intense. I'm going to take down the thickness quite a bit. Let's try 0.1. And that looks a little bit better. You can choose different types of things here, strands, boxes, capsules. Can also adjust the scale. Maybe they go from being really thin to being thicker at the end. I feel like this green is just too much for me. I'm going to change the color of this trail. So that's a nice color. Since I'm thinking that I may want to be able to speed this up or slow it down, I think I might change the settings in here. Instead of doing 30 frames per second, I'm going to do 60 frames per second so we can speed it up and slow it down a little bit more easily in post. I almost never do 60 frames per second, but it really makes sense under these circumstances for this project. I think this is looking nice. I'm going for making some abstract art. So I just want to make something beautiful and interesting. For the first, let's say 92 frames, I'm okay with the emission birth rate being what it is. So I had keyframed that, but then I want it to kind of turn off after that. So I'm going to keyframe it being 0 at 121 frames. Because otherwise I think this scene is just going to look way too chaotic. I like a little bit of randomness and a little bit of chaos, but you can't have too much, and I need to strike that balance. So at this point the birth rate should, right at this point the birth rate should be decreasing. I'm going to see what this looks like. I'll adjust the thickness of the trail as well as its variation and experiment with that a little bit before I choose a final, and I'm checking it in the render view to see how it looks. Now I'm adding in some camera movement, so I dropped in a Redshift camera. I like the turbulence at the setting it is at right now, but I would like to increase the scale by frame 150. The scale controls how large the noise is that's controlling the turbulence. So if you imagine a 3D noise, that's basically what the turbulence is, and it's affecting the particle. What I'll do is I'll keyframe the scale and its strength for the turbulence. I'll increase the scale to about 500. And then I'll take down the strength to about 500. I'll see how that looks. I think this is looking pretty cool. I don't really like this blue color, I've decided. I increased its emission, and I think that's helping. Here I'm changing the color a little bit, and I'll start making some small adjustments to the cameras and some of the settings we already spoke about earlier. I tend to try a setting, see how it looks in the render view, and make small adjustments as I'm working until I find something that I like. I'm going to speed up a few of these sections just so that you aren't waiting for so long for my computer to run these calculations, and you'll get to see it pretty quickly. I'm going to slow down this emitter to 20. And instead of that being at 10,000, I'm going to have it start at 5,000, and we're going to see what this does. This is looking a little bit better to me. I'm adjusting the trail length. The length mode is time, trail length is 30 frames. I'm going to see how that looks. Starting to look a little bit too much like spaghetti to me. A little bit of spaghetti was okay, but it was too much spaghetti. Reducing the trail length should help there be less of these blue lines, which will help it a little bit. As we zoom out, I want there to be a nice sense of depth. And that's created by being able to see larger and smaller particles, and a little bit of the background showing helps create that sense of depth as well, because you can see it go from that bright blue to black in the background, and that really gives the sense of space, which is really important, especially because right now we don't have a horizon line in this animation. Once this animation is done rendering out, I'm going to edit this in post inside of Premiere. And that's how I'm going to make adjustments to the color later on. So at this point in the animation, it's interesting that we have these different colors in here from that texture we originally used. And there's something beautiful about this. I'm going to do something a little bit more experimental right here. So at this point on this frame, I'm going to keyframe the birth rate, and then I'm going to move it one frame over, and I'm going to up this to 5,000. Keyframe it again, and we should kind of see this little explosion beginning all over again that we let kind of die out earlier. And there it is. So that's cool looking, I think anyways. That we're kind of seeing the recreation of what we already just did again by upping the particles. And if I want to see this preview in real time, what I can do is I can go to animate, make preview, and I'll just do the full all frames, and I'll hit OK. I'll make a mini preview for me. Because this is calculating, and it's not calculating in real time, so we'll need to redo this as a simulated preview under make preview, and then that way we'll know that what we're doing is accurate to what we're going to be seeing. And this little bar down here is showing that it's still calculating. Let's hope this one's the final. I think that's a nice camera movement there. And now for the final test of, I like to see what the different frames look like rendered in this new camera view. So I would like to try to see if I can get rid of this weird thing that's happening there by adjusting the emitter. Instead of doing point instances, I'm going to try sphere instances, and that fixed it, so it's lovely. This is why we triple check everything to see if there's anything else we'd like to fix before the final render. So at this point, this animation is looking good to me, and I'm going to let you see this render out anyways, but at this point I pretty much decided that I was done. And I rendered out the animation, exported it out of After Effects, and took it into Premiere to edit it some more, to change the color and do some other cool effects. And that's how I got to the final.